views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi there, it's time for In the District, and this is the program where BronxNet looks at different candidates who are running for office. And tonight we're going to take a look at the 34th Senatorial District race. The incumbent is Alessandra Biaggi, and the challenger is James Gisondi, and Mr. Gisondi joins us now. Nice to see you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's just talk about why run. I mean, you have a judicial background. You've engaged in public service for a very long time. Tell me why it's important for you to get into this race.
Well, I think the district deserves an alternative. They deserve a choice. I think that I represent the traditional democratic values, whereas my opponent is more of a progressive socialist. And I think she's out of step with this district.
Do you feel that there's legislation out there that has not been done? I mean, we'll talk to her, and she's going to tell us a lot about some of the things that did get passed in Albany. What are the things that are important to you?
Well, right now, I think policing reform is on the top of the list. Obviously, with this George Floyd situation, I think that people have finally come to the conclusion that the police departments have too much power.
And what? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
I think this didn't start just yesterday or a month from now. This started under Rudy Giuliani, where he created a criminal justice system where everything's a crime. Arrest. Put it into the criminal justice system. Let the district attorney and the defense attorneys work it out. That's not. There should be more of a social policing. Okay, and then 9/11 came along, and federal, city, state governments were just throwing tons of money at the police departments, where now they've become this almost quasi paramilitary force. And when I say policing reform, I think the first thing we should deal with is how the police department deal with lethal force, because I think that's paramount.
And do we do that in training? I mean, I think that would be the logical first step, no?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not a police officer. I don't know what training they go through at the police academy, but I think that there definitely should be a change in how we train our police officers.
Mm-hmm. One of the issues I know that you're very, very stuck on, and you really want to take a hard look at if you were to get to Albany, is housing. Talk to me about what you think the relationship is like between tenants and landlords. What are the issues? And if you are elected to the Senate, what you would do to correct those problems?
Well, the first issue I would address is you can't lump 1 and 2 family owner occupied apartments or homes with a landlord who has 100, 200, 1,000 units. It's a different animal. What I would like to do is I'd like to pass legislation that would set up a separate part in the housing court, have a 10-day notice, get both the landlord and the tenant into court, and let's find out what the issue is. Is it a landlord problem? Is it a tenant problem? If it's a tenant problem, it's possible that they lost their job. They have a medical situation. They're in a divorce or a separation, and the breadwinner has left. Versus, you may have a owner or landlord who is on a fixed income. Depends upon that income coming in every month, and has the habitability of the apartment has fallen because they don't have the money to fix it. So let's get everybody into the courtroom within 10 days. Let's have some social services. If it's the landlord's problem, maybe we can have block grants. Maybe we can do a reverse mortgage so that they can fix up and have a habitable apartment for the tenant. If it's the tenant's, issue, let's see if we can get some social services. We can get HRA involved, maybe a one-shot deal, maybe some type of jobs program to help them so that it gets resolved. We don't want a situation where, when you have an owner-occupied apartment, you have the tenant and the landlord constantly interacting with each other on a daily basis. And we don't want it to explode into a violent situation. So I think that the Tenant Rights Reform Act missed that.
Isn't that what housing court ought to be doing anyway? And aren't they doing that when they get them into court? Isn't a judge or a hearing officer taking a look and saying, well, why didn't you pay? And, what are because sometimes they don't pay because the conditions in the building are not right. Isn't that what they're doing already or should be doing?
Well, the new law says that you can't bring somebody into court for 90 days. In 90 days, that landlord is in foreclosure. Okay? And, you have large, deep-pocketed landlords who can deal with the situation on their own. When you have an owner-occupied situation, sometimes, like I said, this person may have their life savings in their home, and they depend upon that rental coming in, and they may need some additional help. This may be more of a mediation than it is a legal process.
Well, that's an interesting perspective, is to take it out of the court and put it into mediation so that the courts are less backed up. And we all know that Bronx Housing Court is, lines around the block. It's an absolute zoo. It's an absolute zoo. Mr. Gisondi, why don't you talk a little bit about your own background, since some people might not know who you are, and what in your experience you think makes you qualified to be a senator in the New York State Senate?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm a lifelong resident of the 34th District. I grew up in Allerton Avenue in the St. Louis Parish. I lived in Pelham Parkway North. I've lived in Morris Park. I've lived in Pelham Gardens. When my children were old enough, I moved to Pelham Manor. I lived there for 14 years. I came back. I live now in Locust Point. So my life has been within this 34th District. I'm an attorney. I went to Trinity Law School, which is a very, very liberal law school that really focuses on the law in pursuit of humanity. And I would say that when I went to that law school, it really opened my eyes to social injustice.
And Mr. Gisondi, well, let me just interject before we run out of time. We got about a minute left. Talk a little bit about how you see a rebound from all the things we've been through. Certainly there's been looting in some places, but also certainly businesses, small businesses have been closed. People have lost jobs. If you're a state senator, what do you do to help motivate people and reinvigorate the Bronx?
Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to help the small businesses. Unlike Westchester County that have the big box stores, New York, the Bronx has small businesses. That's the lifeblood of this district. And we need to do something to help them, whether it's grants, loans, social help from the different city agencies. We also need to deal with mortgage and rent forgiveness because there's a lot of people who, after 3-4 months, cannot come up with 3 or 4 months of rent plus the present monthly rent.
Right.
So those are going to be very important to me. The other issue that I have is constituent services. It's very, very important that your state legislators help with constituent services, help them navigate through the different city agencies.
Mr. Gisondi, we're just about out of time. We do appreciate your time this evening. James Gisondi, running for Senate in the 34th Senatorial District. Thank you so much for your time and good luck the rest of the campaign. And I know you agree with me, all voters should come out and vote on June 23rd.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you so much. James Gisondi on In the District.
A decade in the making, created in 1790 to allocate our U.S. population and economy. An every 10 years check-in determining our community residents and needs. Women Voices lead. Suffrage Centennial acknowledges another year of elections, while Women in the Heights artists celebrate their 10 years anniversary through Northern Manhattan Arts Alliance guidance to ensure Uptown is recorded through our census count is how we identify our community needs. Although we are living in a social distancing era, thanks to the worldwide internet, we now have the means to hear the popular voices. So don't be left out. Go to my2020census.gov and make sure to be counted.
Who's most at risk for coronavirus? People over 65, people with underlying medical conditions like heart disease, chronic lung disease, asthma, diabetes, people undergoing cancer treatment, and people with weakened immune systems. What should you do if you or a loved one is at higher risk? Avoid close contact with people. Avoid crowds. Stay home if you can. Wash your hands frequently. Learn more ways to protect yourself and others at coronavirus.gov.
We are on In the District with the incumbent senator from the 34th Senatorial District. Alessandra Biaggi is looking for re-election. And let's just start with where we were 2 years ago. I mean, as you know, I moderated the debate when you were looking to seek the seat. Once you got into the Senate, now that you're 2 years later, have there been any surprises? Is it what you thought? Is it a little different? Is there something that you were like, wow, I didn't know this?
So much. Gary, first of all, thank you for having me back on. And probably not surprising to you, but the other night when I couldn't sleep, I actually watched the debate that you moderated that I was in just to see like how, potentially how far I've come. And it was neat to watch it, I have to say. I mean, every day is a set of new surprises. I'll be very honest with you. If there's one thing that was most surprising to me, it was, I think, how no one prepares you for your job as an elected official to represent your community, of course, right? That's the job we are prepared for. What we're not prepared for, what nobody ever talks about, is the job of the bureaucracy on the inside of the legislature, right? There's a whole dynamic inside of leadership and your colleagues and, moving bills along and what that takes and how to, whip up votes and that entire paradigm is really not something you can read about. You have to just, I think, live through it. But it's a baptism by fire kind of thing, right? So you have to just jump in, and I think that I have succeeded. In fact, I know I have, but nobody can prepare you for that at all.
And you had the good fortune to step in when the Democrats took over the Senate. I suppose things would have been different and maybe a little more frustrating for you because I know you had a very aggressive agenda, in your mind when you stepped into the Senate. So let's talk about some of the legislation that you are most proud of. I know you were part of a lot of different dialogues and things that really did turn out based on what we had talked about all those 2 years ago.
So the other night, I actually did an exercise where I looked at all of the bills on my campaign platform, and I compared it to what passed in the Senate. And it's upward of 98% of the bills that I campaigned on have passed in the Senate. That is, I think, for a freshman state senator, unprecedented. But I'm also not alone in that, because so many of my fellow freshman state senators also were part of making sure that the Senate was Democratic and had a majority, so we could actually do these things, right? So things like codifying Roe v. Wade in the Reproductive Health Act, immigrant reform and immigrant rights like the DREAM Act and the Green Light Bill, landmark legislation as it relates to tenants and tenant protection, which was really hard because of the special interests of the real estate industry, which made it challenging for us. Just this past week, we passed significant police reform with the STAT Act and the repeal of 50A, banning of chokeholds, and so many other bills, but then also things that have just not been a priority. So I'm the chair of the Ethics Committee, a committee that did not meet regularly or more than one time in 10 years. So since chairing that committee, I was committed to and have shown up for that, to at least have one meeting a month, right? COVID obviously prevented us in this term from being able to do that, but up until COVID prevented us from being in Albany physically, I have held a regular meeting of the Ethics Committee. And then also, perhaps the thing I'm most proud of is the chairing of the 2 sexual harassment hearings last year and last session, which was the first time in 27 years that New York State took up the issue. And then we, of course, passed landmark legislation that made us be the strongest state in the country as it relates to sexual harassment and discrimination laws. And so those are just a few of the things that I feel very proud of, and that were not easy. It seems easy because, all of us got behind it. But again, on the inside, you have to really push for the things that are on your agenda. And it's not just as simple as doing a tweet or saying that you care about it. You have to really do a campaign for every single bill that comes your way.
Talk a little bit about the Democratic Party in the Senate. I mean, we talked about just a moment ago about that you were fortunate to have a majority, but there are factions, and you are seen as someone who's on a more progressive side. Your selections of candidates that you're supporting in this election season would lean left, so to speak. Talk about how unified the party is. And in the framework that you just described, how difficult is it to maneuver when there really are, it seems, very clear factions?
It's not easy. It's not easy at all. And part of why it's not easy is not simply because of personality differences or because certain people are more moderate, because I certainly have allies in the Senate who are more moderate, who are my friends. What is not easy about it is that a lot of what we're pushing for, a lot of what we stand for, if you're calling us progressive, so to speak, really disrupts the status quo. And the status quo, really what that means is the already existing frames of power, right? So it sometimes creates this situation where if you're disagreeing with somebody, the interpretation is it's a war, which is not true. But to transform that takes a lot of patience. And sometimes it doesn't always manifest in the way I think that is the most healthy way to push an issue or get behind a candidate. But again, I'm not alone. And so what that means is that there's at least 8 of us or 10 of us or however many of us who are really excited about progressive change, not only because of our age, but because our values align. And what is very clear to me is that a majority of New Yorkers have woken up since 2016, since 2018, even more so. So we're really fighting for what the majority of New Yorkers care about and want. And here's the thing, right? If we're not successful, if we don't get to push something through, right? Nobody stomps their feet and walks away. You just show up again and you learn how to also work together and compromise, because what I've realized perhaps more than anything is that I'm part of a team, which is the State Senate Democratic Conference, and that is a very real thing for me. It feels really good to be part of a team, and I'm learning how to disagree with other colleagues while also still being successful and respectful of one another, because not everything is a battle or a war, which I know is very different in politics, right? This is a new way of doing it, so to speak, but it's not easy. So I don't want anybody to think that we think it is.
You were quoted in the Riverdale Press as saying, as a result of COVID-19, and now, of course, also with the Black Lives Matter movement being very vocal and really making changes, which you've already talked about, that we're going to be looking at a new world as we emerge. Talk about the challenges of that new world, your vision of what that might be, and then, of course, if you are reelected, what that's going to mean in the state Senate.
So COVID-19 hit the Bronx by storm in the worst way possible. Pre-COVID, we had the Bronx being the worst health outcomes in the entire state of New York, 62 out of 62. So many people in the Bronx live with comorbidities of asthma, heart disease, lung disease, obesity, go down the list. Then you have the murder of George Floyd, and you have this uprising of people who are activated and who are angry and who are suffering and feel like they haven't been heard, or that they need to take a stand against this police brutality that is occurring across the world, not even just the United States. So the combination of those two things and leading at this time has been an incredible challenge that nobody could have even predicted.
But so let's talk about the vision before we run out of time.
Sure.
I just want to make sure.
There's an opportunity here, right? And so the vision is that we are able to go through this portal of transformation and build a world that is more inclusive, that is built by all of us, that has laws and rules and policies that takes care of everyone, no matter what their income is, their race, their religion, and actually includes all the voices at the table, which we know the world we live in right now was not built with all of those voices. And so it expands to every policy you can imagine: education, housing, healthcare, passing the New York Health Act and making sure everybody has housing, and go down the list. Food insecurity should not be a reality in New York City. And so we are in a moment where we can actually make sure that these basic needs are met, and that when we rebuild after this, the world is actually one that reflects all of us.
There is maybe about a minute left. If you are reelected, what's aside from things that are going on right now, what's the first thing on your next agenda that you're going to go in and say, all right, this is what I want to do first?
So first of all, I have to say that if I am honored enough to be reelected to be the state senator for the 34th State Senate District, I would take that reelection and I would run and make sure that we are pushing for even more progress than we've already made, right? And so to me, it's the privilege of a lifetime, because it allows you to put a light on things that generally don't have lights on them. And the thing that I would be most excited to do is to take a hard look at sexual assault on college campuses and make sure that every single campus, whether it's a CUNY school, a SUNY school, a private school, is actually equipped to take care of and protect our young adults who are going to school to learn, and being transparent and accountable to the families who put their young ones in these educational institutions. That's one. Two, because I have to say it, we witnessed so many seniors die from COVID-19, and those seniors were also in many of our nursing homes. And so repealing immunity for our nursing homes and our hospitals, who will not be able to be held accountable by the families who have lost their loved ones where there was negligence, is something that is incredibly important. And so holding a hearing on that as well is of the highest importance for me.
I think this will be a case of having legislation change state of minds. I think a lot of this is getting people to just view things differently. Yes. Senator Alessandra Biaggi, good luck in the rest of the campaign. Thank you for joining us here on In the District. And we'll see you around. We'll find out what June 23rd holds. And I know you agree with me, and all the candidates agree. Everybody eligible should come out and vote.
Thank you so much for having me, Gary. And yes, please go out to vote and exercise your voice.
Thank you so much.